The hall of the spire was unlike anything Elias Gray had ever seen. Though he had fought across ruined cities, burned colonies, and alien jungles in his service to Earth, here the very air seemed heavy, vibrating faintly with the hum of living structures. The Zelari did not build their palaces from stone and steel, as humans did, but coaxed their homes from the marrow of the world itself. Pillars of crystalline growth rose into vaulted arches, their inner veins pulsing faintly with bioluminescent light. The floor beneath him was smooth as glass, but warm, like flesh. Thousands of eyes were upon him. The court of the Zelari was a menagerie of alien lords and ladies, each draped in living garments of silkweed, their crowns alive with twitching antennae or crystalline spines. They whispered in tones sharp as knives, their words like hissing wind. Elias could not understand their language, but he knew mockery when he heard it. He was brought forward in chains, his wrists bound with biometal restraints that bit into his skin like cold teeth. Guards, towering creatures with insectoid limbs and armor fused into their exoskeletons, flanked him. They nudged him forward until he stood at the very base of the throne. The throne itself was no simple seat. It rose like a living tree from the heart of the chamber, its roots twisting upward into an intricate lattice that framed the figure upon it. And upon that throne sat the alien queen. Elias had seen alien monarchs before, rulers swollen with decadence, draped in jewels and arrogance. But this queen was something else. She was tall, her form regal, but not grotesque, her body wrapped in living garments that shimmered with shifting hues. Her crown was no ornament, but a mantle of silver filaments that seemed to breathe, each strand glowing faintly with the rhythm of her pulse. And her eyes, 6 of them, layered in a triangular pattern across her face, burned with intelligence so sharp it seemed to slice through the air itself. The hall fell silent as she leaned forward. Resting her long clawed fingers upon the armrests of her living throne, she studied him with an intensity that unsettled even Elias. A man who had stared down death more times than he could count. For a long, oppressive moment, no one spoke. Then her voice broke the silence. It was low and resonant, carrying not just across the chamber, but into the bones of those who heard it. "Human," she said, her words translated through the biocrystal embedded in the walls. "Do you know why you stand before me?" Elias met her gaze, unflinching. His lips were cracked, his body bruised from the skirmish that had led to his capture, but his spirit remained intact, to be judged, or executed, or displayed as a trophy. The court erupted in laughter, sharp, cruel, echoing. To them, this was audacity, a small, fragile creature daring to speak to their queen as though he were her equal. Some sneered. Others clicked their mandibles in amusement. One lord leaned to another and muttered something that made their cluster burst into cruel mirth, but the queen did not laugh. Her 6 eyes narrowed, not in disdain, but in consideration. She tilted her head slightly, as though the human's words had landed somewhere deep within her thoughts. Her gaze flicked across his posture, his straight spine, his steady eyes, the way his fists clenched, not in fear, but readiness. Elias could feel her weighing him, dissecting him not as a prisoner, but as a puzzle. He felt naked under that gaze, as though she could see beyond his flesh and bone, into the marrow of what made him human. When she finally spoke again, her words were deliberate, each syllable ringing like a judgment. "Your chains speak of weakness. Your body speaks of fragility. Yet your eyes, they speak of something else." She turned her head slightly, and the court leaned forward, straining to hear. Then, in a voice that silenced every whisper, she declared, "Behold the human. His fate will decide more than his life. His fate will decide the future of us all." The words struck like a gong. The nobles recoiled in shock, their many eyes blinking in disbelief. This was no simple prisoner's trial. The queen had elevated him into something greater, something symbolic. Elias did not fully understand what she had just unleashed upon him, but he could feel the weight settle across his shoulders. His life was no longer his alone. He was about to become the fulcrum upon which entire empires might tilt, and though his chains still bound his hands, A grim smile ghosted across his lips. Humanity had always been underestimated. If his fate would decide the future, then he would make sure that future belonged to Earth. The Queen's proclamation left the court buzzing with unease. The nobles exchanged whispers sharp as blades, their antennae flicking in agitation, their luminous eyes betraying outrage. To them, this human was nothing more than prey dragged in chains of curiosity to dissect, not a figure of consequence. Yet the Queen had spoken, and her word was law. But even in law, the Zelari had their traditions. If the Queen would not condemn the human, then he must be tested. And so it was decreed, Elias Grey would face the 3 trials enchant ordeals of body, mind, and spirit, used only in the rarest of circumstances to prove worth. Few aliens had survived them. None of Elias's kind ever had. The first trial, the beast the arena, was alive with sound when Elias was brought forth. Thousands of voices filled the stands, the court and its soldiers watching from their high seats carved into living crystal. The ground beneath his boots was damp, the air reeking of old blood. This was no gladiatorial theater for entertainment. It was a place of judgment, a pit where lives ended to prove a point. Elias stood unarmed, still in his torn uniform, his wrists raw where chains had only just been struck off. Across from him, sealed gate trembled as something massive struck it from behind. The Queen's herald stepped forward, his voice amplified by biocrystals. First trial. Survival. The Crinks will decide if this human spirit is worthy. The gate shattered open. The Crinks burst forth like a nightmare made flesh. Twice the size of a grizzly, armored in jagged plates of obsidian-colored chitin, its maw gaped with rows of glassy teeth. 6 legs carried it forward with terrible speed, claws gouging the arena floor. The nobles hissed in anticipation. Elias didn't flinch. He had seen worse sore, so he told himself. Fear clawed at his gut, but training whispered louder. He circled, waiting for the first lunge. It came fast. Too fast. The beast's claw swiped, grazing his ribs and knocking him sprawling. Pain flared, but Elias rolled, snatching up the length of broken chain still dangling from his wrist. His weapon was nothing compared to the beast's natural arsenal. But humans had never relied solely on strength. He dodged again, narrowly, his mind analyzing angles, momentum, and timing. The Crinks lunged with its bulk, and Elias dove to the side, letting its own speed carry it past him. As it turned, Elias swung the chain, wrapping it around one of its limbs. The beast roared, jerking, trying to tear free. Gritting his teeth, Elias pulled hard, using leverage rather than force. The Crinks stumbled, crashing sideways. He leaped onto its back, winding the chain around its throat plates, pulling with every ounce of his will. The struggle felt endless. Claws slashed his leg, pain seared his shoulder, but he refused to let go. At last, with a guttural snarl, the Crinks convulsed and fell still. Silence crashed over the arena. Elias stood, drenched in sweat and blood, the broken chain dangling from his hand. He looked up into the stands and locked eyes with the Queen. She did not smile, but her gaze carried something unmistakable: recognition. The second trial, the flame victory in the arena, did not grant respite. Hours later, Elias was shackled again, this time to a crystalline frame in the heart of the hall. The second trial was pain, meant to strip all illusions and test the raw core of will. A column of biocrystal ignited above him, pouring searing light down upon his body. It was no simple heat. It burrowed into nerves, making every muscle scream. The Zelari prided themselves on this device that had broken warlords, mercenaries, even entire champions of lesser species. The court gathered to watch. Some smirked, eager to see the human's bravado shattered. Minutes dragged into an hour. Elias's body shook, sweat poured from him, his skin blistered under the merciless light. The urge to scream gnawed at him, clawing for release. But he clamped his jaw shut until blood seeped from where he bit his lip. He remembered Earth. He remembered the comrades who had died so he could stand here, the friend he had buried with his own hands. Pain was nothing compared to the cost of surrender. When the beam finally dimmed, he collapsed, but not to his knees. He forced himself upright, trembling but standing. His voice was hoarse but defiant. "That all you've got?" Gasps rippled through the chamber. The court, who had expected to see a broken husk, saw instead a man who would not bend. The third trial, the choice, the final test, was delivered with cruel elegance. Elias was brought before two figures, himself, and another captive dragged in, a wounded human soldier, his comrade from the same skirmish. The man's breathing was shallow, his body battered nearly to death. The Queen's herald presented the choice: freedom, if you renounce him; chains, if you do not. The court leaned forward, eager to watch betrayal, to confirm their belief that loyalty was weakness. But Elias didn't hesitate. He strode to his comrade, lifted the man's broken body onto his shoulder, and turned back to the herald. "We both walk out of here, or neither of us does." The silence that followed was thicker than stone. Nobles stared in disbelief. Some hissed in disgust. Others muttered uneasily. What kind of creature? The hall of the spire was tense with expectation when Elias Gray was brought before the throne once more. His body was battered from the trials. The slash across his ribs still burned from the Crinx's claws. His skin was marred by the crystalline beam, and his shoulder ached from carrying his comrade, but he stood tall. He would not give the court the satisfaction of seeing weakness. The nobles of the Zalari were already in heated debate, their voices clashing like knives in the shadows of the chamber. Some called for his execution, arguing that sparing him after such defiance was madness. Others, their antennae trembling with unease, insisted he should be studied, dissected even, so the Empire could understand how such a fragile-looking being could endure trials meant to break the strongest. One noble shouted, "He is an aberration, no more than a beast that survived by accident." Another countered, "Accidents do not endure flame and agony in silence. Accidents do not carry the weak when freedom is offered." The Queen had not spoken since the trials ended. She had watched every moment in silence, her 6 eyes following Elias with a focus that unsettled even her closest advisors. Now, as the debate grew into chaos, she lifted one long clawed hand. Instantly silence fell. The Queen rose from her throne. Her towering figure descended the crystal steps with regal grace, the silver mantle of her living crown flowing like liquid light. She stopped before Elias, so close he could see the faint shimmer of energy coursing through her translucent skin. The air was thick with the weight of her presence. She studied him openly, circling him as though she were not merely a monarch, but a judge in some trial older than memory. "Human," she said at last, her voice resonant enough to vibrate in his chest. "You were brought here as a prisoner of war. Bound in chains, your life was thought worthless. Yet you endured." She paused, letting her words ripple across the chamber. "You have shown strength not of the body alone, but of will. You bore the beast and bent it to your cunning. You endured torment without surrender, and when given the chance to save yourself, you carried another upon your back." Her clawed finger lifted, pointing directly at him, though her eyes never wavered from the court. "This is the truth of the human." The chamber erupted again, voices hissing in outrage. "Blasphemy," cried one noble, his frilled headdress trembling with fury. "They are a primitive race. Dangerous," shouted another. "If we honor them, we invite rebellion." "They will never be equals," hissed a third. But Elias could see the flickers of doubt among others. Even those who hated him most could not deny what they had witnessed. He had survived trials that had broken their own champions. He had embodied something they could not categorize: loyalty at the cost of freedom. The Queen raised her hand again. Once more silence fell like a blade. Her gaze swept over her people. "You see fragility?" she said, her voice low but commanding. "I see something else. Strength that does not come from claws or armor, but from spirit. A fire that does not dim when pressed by pain or fear. A bond that refuses to break, even when survival demands it." She turned back to Elias, her many eyes reflecting him as though he were being carved into her memory. You stand unbowed in the heart of your enemy's empire. You have no army, no weapon, no crown. Yet you are not broken. Tell me, human, why? Elias swallowed. The silence pressed on him, but he refused to falter. Because that's what we are, he said, voice rough but steady. Humans fight. Not just for ourselves, but for each other. We don't break. Even when you try to break us, a ripple spread through the court. Some sneered, but others lowered their gazes, unsettled. The words carried weight, not because they were grand, but because Elias had proven them true with his actions. The queen lifted her chin, her decision crystallizing. Her mantle shimmered brighter, casting ghostly light across the chamber. Her next words would be carved into history. This human's fate is chosen. He will not die. He will not serve. He will be my shield and my test. Through him, we shall learn whether humanity is a threat or a salvation. The court erupted in shock. A noble collapsed to his knees in disbelief. Another spat curses, demanding her decision be reversed, but none could challenge her decree. The queen's word was final. Elias stood motionless, stunned. Her shield? He thought. It sounded like a role drenched in both honor and danger. To be raised above the status of prey, yet marked as an experiment. But as he looked into the queen's eyes, he understood this was no mercy. This was trust mixed with scrutiny, honor mixed with risk. The chamber trembled with fury, but the queen ignored it all. She turned, ascended her throne once more, and declared, "So it is spoken. So it shall be." And with that, Elias Gray's life was bound to the fate of an empire. The queen's decree echoed through the crystalline hall like a thunderclap, leaving behind a silence thick with disbelief. For the nobles of the Zellery Empire, it was an unthinkable breach of tradition. A human, a frail, primitive creature taken in chains, was not only spared execution, but elevated into a position of trust beside the throne. The court erupted within hours. Whispers grew into shouting, shouting into outright defiance. Clusters of lords and ladies hissed among themselves, their antennae quivering with agitation. Some claimed the queen had been bewitched. Others muttered darkly about betrayal, and a few even whispered the forbidden word. Madness. Elias saw the storm growing, but did not understand its full weight. To him, the queen's words were a strange mixture of honor and peril. Her shield? He muttered to himself when the guards escorted him to his new quarters. The room was far more lavish than a prisoner's cell, lined with soft-woven mats and shimmering crystal walls. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still in a cage. That night, as he lay awake staring at the glowing veins pulsing faintly in the ceiling, he thought of Earth. Would his people even know he still lived? Would they see his survival as betrayal or as a chance? He clenched his fists. Whatever the queen meant by shield, he would not become her pawn without cost. Court rebellion the next day, Elias was summoned back to the throne room. He stood beside the queen, still bruised from his trials, his comrade resting in recovery chambers elsewhere in the palace. The chamber seethed with unrest. Nobles shouted over one another, their voices carrying venom. This is folly. He is an enemy soldier. To elevate him is to invite ruin. Your judgment is clouded, my queen. This thing cannot be trusted. The queen did not flinch. She rose, her mantle of silver filaments glowing brighter with each passing second. Her voice carried above theirs all. Silence. The words struck like a command coded into their very bones. The court fell quiet, though anger still boiled in their eyes. She gestured to Elias. Look upon him. You call him frail, yet he survived the crinks. You call him weak, yet he endured the flame. You call him faithless, yet he chose chains over betrayal, some nobles hissed. Others scoffed, but none could deny the truth of her words. This human, she continued, is more than what your eyes see. He embodies a power we have long forgotten, a power not of claw nor fire, but of loyalty. And so I say again, he will stand by me not as a servant, but as my shield. The nobles could do nothing but bow, forced to submit to her will. Yet Elias could feel the venom in their stares. To them, he was not a symbol of strength. but a threat to their way of life. Shadows of treachery, the first attempt, came within 3 nights. Elias woke to the faint scrape of a blade against crystal. An assassin, cloaked in iridescent camouflage, slipped through the wall itself, part of the palace's living structure, betrayed by bribery or treachery. Elias moved instinctively, years of battlefield reflexes guiding him. He hurled the bedding into the assassin's face, buying a fraction of a second. That was enough. He slammed the alien into the wall, grappling with strength born of desperation. The assassin's blade carved a burning line across his arm, but Elias wrenched the weapon free and drove it into the creature's chitinous side. When guards finally arrived, Elias was sitting against the wall, bleeding but alive. The assassin's body crumpled nearby. Word spread quickly. The human had survived even an assassination attempt. Some nobles whispered that fate itself seemed to shield him. Others spat in fury, convinced he was a curse upon their empire. The queen visited him herself, her many eyes narrowing as she studied the wound on his arm. "They fear you," she said quietly. "That is why they strike in the dark." Elias chuckled bitterly. "Fear, hates, it's all the same. I've seen it before." He paused, then added with steel in his tone, "But I won't run from it." The queen inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. For a Zellery monarch, it was no small thing. A growing unease in the weeks that followed. Elias remained at the queen's side during her audiences and councils. His presence was both a statement and a provocation. The nobles simmered with resentment, but none dared openly defy her word. Still, Elias could feel the tension mounting, every whisper and every sideways glance carrying a promise of eventual violence. Yet, something else stirred in the shadow's curiosity. Younger members of the court, those not yet calcified by centuries of arrogance, began to observe Elias with different eyes. They saw how he endured, how he protected not only himself, but those weaker than him. Some even approached him in secret, asking questions about humanity, about Earth, about what drove a man to carry another's burden, the cracks in the Empire's certainty. The grand hall of the alien court had never been so silent. The courtiers' warriors plated in shining exo-armor, priests wrapped in shimmering fabric, and advisors cloaked in the sigils of power watched the throne as if the queen's very breath carried the weight of destiny. All eyes were locked on her. All ears strained for her voice. And then she spoke. Her words echoed in the vaulted chamber. Crystalline and sharp, "This human shall not be executed. He shall not be enslaved. He shall not be dismissed. He is to walk beside me. His fate is bound to mine." The court erupted in chaos. Some gasped aloud, their spines stiffening in outrage. Others hissed curses beneath their breath. A few, more perceptive than the rest, whispered that this was no mere choice of compassionate, was a declaration that shifted. It's the foundation of their empire. For countless cycles, the Zerethian Empire had crushed, consumed, or controlled every new species they encountered. But now, for the first time, their queen had spared an outsider, and worse still, elevated him. Darius felt the weight of the hall pressing down on him, though he stood straighter than he had before. The fear that had once gripped him was gone, replaced by something steadier, forged in the heat of her words. She had spoken of his fate, but he realized that fate was no channel, was a challenge. One of the generals rose from his place near the dais, his voice booming across the hall. "Your Majesty, this cannot be. He is dangerous. He is unknown. To let him live is to invite ruin." His clawed hand pointed toward Darius with venom. The queen turned her gaze on him, her eyes glowing with a faint golden shimmer that silenced even the boldest. "And yet he has stood where none of you dared. He has defied fear where your kind trembled. He carries within him the spirit of survival itself. Do you not see? His fate is not ruin. It is strength for me and for this empire." Her words carried a force beyond politics, beyond tradition. They carried conviction. And in that conviction lay a power none could refute. As the arguments raged, Darius finally understood what had drawn her to him. To the court, he was an anomaly, an interloper from a death world so hostile that it bred creatures of tenacity unmatched. To her, however, he was proof that something greater existed beyond their borders. He thought of Earth, its storms, its wars, its scars, and its triumphs. He realized that humanity's story was not one of domination, but of adaptation. And now, in this throne room, among beings who thought themselves eternal, that story had been seen for what it truly was, unbreakable. The Queen silenced the hall with a single raised hand. You demand to know his fate. I have already spoken it. But know this, it is not his fate alone that I have declared. It is yours as well. From this day forward, humanity is no longer beneath our gaze. They are beside it. Those who stand against this truth stand against me. A hush followed. The defiance that had sparked in the general's eyes dimmed under the weight of her authority. The priests bowed their heads, whispering prayers that the gods themselves might approve such boldness. Slowly, even the dissenters yielded, for none could openly defy the queen without sealing their own doom. Later, as the court dispersed, the queen descended from her throne. She approached Darius, her presence towering yet oddly intimate. Her voice lowered for him alone. You do not yet understand the full measure of what I have done. In saving you, I have bound myself to the unknown. You are not my subject. You are my equal in this. Darius met her gaze without flinching. Then I'll live up to it. Whatever comes for the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile. Not the smile of a ruler, but of someone who had glimpsed hope in a place she had never thought to look. And so it was that the human, once a captive, once a stranger, was bound to the fate of an empire. His survival was no longer merely his own. His presence had become a catalyst, a wedge that split tradition from possibility. The court had heard her decree, and the galaxy beyond would soon follow. The alien queen saw him, turned to her court, and spoke his fate. But in truth, what she had spoken was the beginning of something larger, the fate of them all.